News Unscripted, your home for humanity-centered tech journalism. Thank you for joining us today. Our guest today is Louis Rosenberg, who's going to be speaking with us about the perils and pitfalls and the benefits of artificial intelligence. Louis Rosenberg is a PhD who has been working in the fields of AR, VR, and AI for several decades. He's a pioneer in the fields of augmented reality, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence. He earned his PhD from Stanford. He's been awarded more than 300 patents in these fields, and he's founded a number of companies, including Unanimous AI, where he is currently the founder, CEO, and chief scientist. Also, Immersion Corporation, Microscribe, and Outland Research. Louis Rosenberg joins us now. Louis, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you have been in this field for a long time, and yet in the last few months, there has been an explosion of interest and activity and products being made with artificial intelligence in a way we've never seen before. Help us understand, just put some perspective for us on where we are at this time in sanity.
Yeah. So it's an exciting time for the field of artificial intelligence. I also think it's a scary time for the field of artificial intelligence. The one thing that I think is absolutely clear is that what we're entering right now is really a computing revolution that I would say is similar in scope and magnitude to the PC revolution, the internet revolution, the mobile phone revolution. It will have that big of an impact on every aspect of how we interact with computers. The difference is it will happen much faster, and that's what makes it kind of scary. Because if you think of the PC revolution. Took a decade really from when the first PCs started to come out till it really impacted most of society. If you think of, say, the mobile phone revolution, the iconic iPhone moment when the very first iPhone was revealed, that was fast. It took only 6 years from that moment until more than half of the flip phones in the world had been replaced with mobile phones. The AI revolution is going to be even faster. It's with the deployment of these large language models, ChatGPT, and the various competitors. These large language models will fundamentally change computing, really for two reasons. One, it can create human competitive content at scale, right? It can create videos, images, articles, scientific papers, almost anything you can imagine. An AI can create when given a text prompt, which will change a lot of things. It'll affect jobs. We could talk about those things. But the other piece of it that I actually think is even more consequential is that these generative AI systems allow conversational systems, conversational computing to finally be realized. And so over the next couple of years, we will be talking to our computers either by text chat or by voice chat, and ultimately with human faces that are simulated that we talk to. But the way we interact with businesses online, the way we interact with search engines, the way we interact with every type of product and service and app is going to go from point and click to conversational interactions. And there are really amazing things about that, and there are also scary things about that. But the key thing to know is that when we talk about conversational interactions, we're not talking about what people have been doing with Siri and Alexa, for almost a decade, where you issue a command and the computer does something. We're talking about conversational interfaces where you're holding a conversation with the computer. The computer's keeping track of the context of that conversation over time. It's even asking you to elaborate. It's asking you for context. It's a real conversation. And even 18 months ago, it would seem like that was not within reach. ChatGPT was launched 5 months ago. It seems like 5 years ago, 5 months ago, and already we're seeing this get deployed widely. By major companies. Microsoft, Google are all putting conversational AI into the biggest applications we interact with, search engines, and ultimately everything else.
Let me ask you about that. Let me ask you about the speed at which everything is being deployed. There is a tremendous acceleration of artificial intelligence programs into our daily lives. Do you think it's too fast? Are you worried about what these AI chatbots and various programs are going to do to the fabric of society?
I am worried because it's a fundamental change, and regulators and policymakers who already have been struggling to make sure that previous technologies were safe, um, now have to face this new computing revolution, and I think that they don't fully appreciate the magnitude of the change. I mean, there are some things
Help us understand, what is that magnitude? What are you
right.
thinking we're going to see?
So there are going to be some dangers that are kind of familiar and some dangers that aren't familiar. The familiar dangers are the ones that policymakers are talking about right now. There's the impact on jobs, and that's very real. You now have computing systems that can create you know professional quality human content at scale. It can create images and photographs and articles and marketing copy and everything, summarize things, and that is already affecting human jobs. I mean, if you're an artist or a graphic designer, a freelance artist who makes their living, like this is already Armageddon for you. Like this,
Or a musician, right? We're seeing the
if
music being created
right,
as well.
if
Yeah.
you're a musician who, especially somebody who's making their living, generating musical content for all the things that we take for granted, background music for video games and for already generative AI is impacting you. Um, it's going to impact every profession. It's we should be worried about it, but I don't think it's an existential threat. I think that we've dealt with these types of transitions in the past, where a technology suddenly makes what we'd call a massive efficiency, and so jobs have to change a little bit. In this case, the jobs that are going to be affected are some pretty sophisticated jobs. From it'll affect journalism, it'll affect the medical profession. Radiologists and oncologists and other medical professionals are very worried about AI automating big pieces of their profession. So that's one risk. The other risk is that while these systems can produce content at professional levels, it's not always 100% accurate. It is, and it can make errors. It can make pretty substantial errors. It's amazingly good, but when it makes these errors, it makes them with profound confidence, right? I mean, these systems, they they produce documents, and they produce dialogue that's very authoritative. It's very easy for us to think, oh, it came out of the computer, we believe it, and yet it could make errors. And if that's being integrated into major professions, then these errors can propagate, and it's very hard to fact check, and so it is a danger, and so it's another issue. The third kind of common problem that regulators worry about is that the ability to generate content at scale means you can create misinformation at scale. You can create traditional forms of misinformation, whether it's fake articles or fake scientific papers or fake or deep fake videos or images. You can create them now with generative AI. You can create them at scale. It's not a new problem, but the risk is it could flood the world with so much fake content. People won't know what's real and what's not real, and it's a danger. And again, it's a familiar danger, and there are potential solutions. For example, it, regulators could require that watermarking technology gets used, so that every piece of every piece of AI generated content is digitally watermarked in a way where it's identifiable as AI generated, and is even identifiable in terms of where it came from, what source. That's not a trivial process, and any kind of regulation is very, very hard. So right now we're in this kind of dangerous state where those types of protections aren't in place. And so those are kind of the familiar protections. The dangers that I write about and talk about the most are the ones that are less familiar. And it comes from the fact that generative AI is not just going to create traditional content at scale. Generative AI can also create really a new kind of content, a content that I would call interactive generative media. And the reason is it can create content instantly, and it can adapt content instantly, which means it can now create targeted content specifically for every single user it engages. And so when you go to a website, or when you go, instead of a targeted ad being, it knows something a little about you, and by knowing something a little about you, it picks an ad from maybe a handful of ads. It can now custom create an advertisement specifically for you. That's whether it's a straight image or a video, where the colors and fonts and the types of people that it shows and the types of landscapes, or is it showing an urban scene or a rural scene, everything about that advertisement could be customized for you. And then it can learn which of those advertisements were effective on you, because it can generate that. And over time, it can become really, really good at creating the most persuasive images and most persuasive messaging for you personally. And that's dangerous. But it gets even more dangerous when we realize that advertising is going to shift from these pre-created images or videos to interactive conversational advertisements. And so right now with ChatGPT and Bard and other of these systems, you can talk to your computer to when it's a search engine, and you can hold a conversation that's a search. Well, it will be just as easy for these platforms to sell advertising that's conversational. And so now you're searching about electric vehicles, and you want to find out about where are the charging stations in my local area, and it could just adjust the conversation and now inject promotional content from a paid sponsor telling you about a particular car that it thinks would fit your needs. And it could be asking you questions. It could say, well, how far do you drive? How far do you drive every day? And how far is it from where you live to where you work? And it can ask you these questions, and then it could start delivering promotional content. And you might not even realize when it transitioned from informational content that a search engine would give you to promotional content that's an advertisement, unless there were regulations that said, no, that it has to identify itself as a conversational advertisement.
And let's talk about regulation, because, when we look around the world, we see that the European Union has been taking some steps towards regulation. Here in America, there are a few members of Congress who have computer science degrees, others who obviously recognize that this is coming and have started to move towards new pieces of legislation that address artificial intelligence. Just last week, the White House announced that they're putting $140 million into 7 new AI research centers around the country. Tell us about Sam Altman coming to Congress tomorrow to speak with legislators. He's the CEO of OpenAI that made ChatGPT, of course. What is this moment in time, his appearance, and this sort of growing interest by Congress going to actually do? Do you see regulations coming down the pipeline for these new technologies?
Yeah. Fortunately, I do think that regulators and policymakers and politicians are taking this more seriously than they have taken previous changes in the computing landscape. And maybe just because there's something about AI that makes people more nervous than other technologies. Maybe science fiction has done a good job at prepping society to be more cautious. The other thing that I've noticed, and I talk to many policymakers and regulators in the U.S. and around the world, I also noticed that it is a far more bipartisan issue than other types of policy and regulation. I think there's equal amounts of fear from all directions, which is good, because I do think I do think that this is something that policymakers, regulators, politicians can actually make a difference about. And I think that um, they should be cautious. And it's funny because sometimes, you hear people make the counter argument that, oh, policy and regulation will slow down innovation. It will put the U.S. at a disadvantage, or any country that's talking about regulation will put them at a disadvantage. I actually think it's the opposite, which is the you know the countries that put policy and regulation in place that allows AI to advance in a way that's safe for their population. Like that's what it means to win the race. It's not like these AI policies are protecting us, are insulating us from the rest of the world. I mean, these AI systems will be deployed inside the U.S. and and potentially will have manipulative impacts and negative impacts on to U.S. citizens. The same is true if you talk to policymakers in any other country. And so, really, the perspective of policymakers should be: this is going to happen. It's going to happen quickly, and we need to get ahead of it to make sure that our population is safe from these technologies, from all the different perspectives that it can cause harms.
And what would you like to see? If you could put one piece of legislation in place, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the thing that I focus on and I worry about the most is the potential misuse of these conversational systems, because we're so familiar with policy for regulating advertisements and media and content that is a fixed piece of content that just gets shared or distributed. And conversational, when media becomes conversational and interactive, and the AI can be reacting to you, it becomes so dangerous. And it becomes dangerous because if you think of uh, the ability for a skilled salesperson to manipulate somebody, to really manipulate them into buying something they might not need. How do they do that? They're not going to hand you a brochure to do that. They're going to engage you in conversation. They're going to ask you a bunch of questions. They're going to size you up. They're going to hear your reservations and your resistance, and they're going to adjust their tactics. And a skilled salesperson could be very manipulative. Well, we're now at a point where a conversational AI can do all those same things, right? Can engage you in conversation, size you up, ask you questions, adjust its tactics based on how you react, and it can use that to persuade you into buying something you don't need or believing something that's not true. Because the very same tactics that can be used for advertising can be used for misinformation, disinformation, propaganda. And so, to me, the single most important protection that you can put in place are requirements that when you're conversationally interacting with an AI, that it has to tell you if there's some third party sponsor that has an influence objective that it's trying to convey. If I'm talking to an AI and it's trying to sell me a particular brand of car, and it tells me, it says, hey, I know you came to my search engine to get information, but now I'm transitioning to having a promotional conversation with you, then at least I know that this is an advertisement. But a conversation is so fluid that it would be very easy for you to go to any website that can have AI built into it, and with APIs, basically every website will have a conversational influence interface built into it, and when that happens, if it's transitioning to something that's promotional, it should have to tell you, and so you can at least be skeptical. You can at least have the right context that this is not informational service. This is promotional information, and if it's and for kids, it should just be outlawed, because for kids, they already have a hard time telling the difference between real content and promotional content. If we're in a world where we're actually talking to our computers, and those computers right now, when we talk to computers, we're typing into ChatGPT, but that very soon will be voice, where you're just talking to a very natural, realistic sounding voice, and then very soon after that, there will be virtual humans that are look like look like my face on Zoom, but it's completely computer generated. And that's when you go to a website, that's how you're interacting with customer service. And if it's kids and they go to a website and it's a cute character that they're talking to about trying to find out some information about dinosaurs, and that character starts trying to convince the kid to buy this great dinosaur cereal, that's dangerous. And
Yeah.
we this idea of interactive advertisements is not something that we've dealt with before in the past. It's a completely new capability made possible by these generative AI systems that can create content on the fly, and they can create it specifically for you if it's given a little bit of information about you, and it can adapt its tactics based on how you're reacting in real time.
So you'd say keep it away from kids, and then disclosure, disclosure, disclosure. There's obviously a lot of fear out there, and you've expressed why we should have those very well-founded concerns. As a scientist, though, I'm sure also seeing these industries grow, whether it is augmented reality, virtual reality, or artificial intelligence, it must also be an exciting time to see what is coming and the potential benefits to humanity. When
So,
you
so
look, yeah,
no, so I would just to agree. I mean, I would absolutely agree, and it's I speak a lot about the dangers, but conversational computing is a great thing for people, right? Like we, you know, it's the most natural way for us to interact with with anything. And we will, we'll be holding conversations, and they'll be convenient, and we'll get information. These technologies are powerful, and they will enable really positive things. They will enable, computers to be, tutor kids on math in, not by just having images pop up, but by actually explaining things conversationally, customized for that kid. And so it's, making computing more natural and more intuitive and more personal is a positive thing, as long as there are regulations and policies in place that prevent those powers from being abused. And because this is happening so quickly, regulators and policymakers they started out behind, because the way the AI industry has evolved, really throughout its history, is it has a fast jump, and then it goes slow for a long time, and then fast jump, and this is really one of the fastest jumps we've seen.
I watched a TED talk you gave about 5 years ago, and you were talking about some abilities of AI in the decades ahead. Is it moving even faster than you thought it was? You were warning about, a new alien sort of intelligence that was going to grow up among us. Do you feel like AI is at this point sentient, or do you think that is coming in the next few years?
So I do not believe that current AI technologies are sentient, or even demonstrating sentience. And I know there's a lot of people who claim that it is. I think these current AI technologies are they're remarkably good at pretending to be human, which and we humans like to then attribute sentience to it, but they're not human, and they're not sentient. They have no will of their own. But I do think that it is more likely than not that these AI technologies, with some substantial advances, will evolve into systems that are basically conscious and self-aware in ways that we think of humans as being conscious and self-aware. Is it going to happen tomorrow? I don't think so. I personally think it's probably a decade or two away. There are other folks who think it could happen anytime. It could happen a year from now, or it could be 50 years from now. But when it does happen, I also think it is a danger, because, as I said, these systems are really good at pretending to be human, but they're not human. They don't think the way we humans think. They don't function the way we humans function. And so what we've really done is we trained these systems to know everything about people, how these systems will be trained on all of our artifacts, all of our writings, all of our, these systems will know everything about us. They'll know how to influence us, how to persuade us, how to negotiate with us. And if at some point in the future, let's say 20 years from now, these systems do develop a will of their own, or do become self-aware and end up having interests that are misaligned with ours, we're at an extreme disadvantage because we've basically spent decades training these systems to understand us, and we really don't understand these systems. To us, they're still a black box. And so I do think it's worth the industry putting effort into the long-term protections against a sentient AI. But I do think that the real dangers that regulators and policymakers need to think of right now is not that these systems are about to become sentient, but that these systems are powerful, and they just need to be used by a human who's sentient. And so, with a sentient human can use or misuse or abuse these technologies, to create misinformation, disinformation, and manipulate large segments of the population.
Louis, thank you so much for your time. I would love to have you come back and talk with us a bit about the work that you're doing at Unanimous AI, which we didn't even get a chance to get into today. But would you come on back and talk with us about that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Happy to.
All right. Well, thank you again for your time. Thanks for your insight into where we are right now in this moment of time in the evolution of artificial intelligence.
Yep. Thanks.
All right. Coming up on tomorrow's show, come on back and join us at noon tomorrow. We're going to be speaking with Linton Johnson. Linton is the CEO and Chief Visionary Officer for Ovis. Ovis, close to my heart as a journalist, is a brand new platform for journalism. Ovis aims to end fake news by incentivizing the truth using the power of the blockchain. So that's tomorrow at noon with Linton Johnson. Thanks again for joining us here on Gatherverse News Unscripted. We are your home for humanity-centered tech journalism. See you tomorrow.